We begin with the government confirming that all cabinet and junior ministers will travel abroad this St Patrick's Day, with representatives visiting 50 countries, including 8 ministers heading to the United States at a time of strained EU-US relations. The Taoiseach is also expected to meet President Donald Trump in the White House, a move that has sparked political debate and public concern, with a recent poll showing a clear majority of the public believes the Taoiseach should not go through with the visit. Joining us now is the Tulla-based Minister of State, Timmy Dooley. Timmy, good morning to you.
Good morning, Alan.
Thanks very much for joining us. So, as per usual, a large number of government representatives heading abroad, for over 40 to more than 50 countries to mark our National Day. Ministers travelling to the US, as I say, at a time of strained EU-US relations. Does Ireland risk being seen, Timmy, as being too aligned with the US at a moment in time when transatlantic relations, I don't think have ever been under such pressure?
No, they're under enormous pressure, the transatlantic relations. We, from an Irish perspective and an Irish government perspective, have a kind of a unique relationship with the United States. We're a small country, but because so many of our diaspora, so many people that travelled from Ireland over the last 100 years, 150 years and longer, have very significant roles in US politics and in US business. So we get a much better hearing than many of our European colleagues that even have greater trading relationships. So we're very good in Ireland, I think, at diplomacy and addressing significant and serious strains and issues as they arrive. So I think on this occasion, the Taoiseach not only making the case for Ireland and our continued strong relationship in his meetings with President Trump, but will also, I think, be shouldering some of the responsibility from a European perspective in trying to get over the difficulties that have arisen and try to work through an ongoing dialogue that seeks to, I suppose, smoothen some of the ripples that we have seen.
And how successful do you think any efforts would be in that regard? Because you mentioned earlier on you think we get a better hearing than some of our neighbours on this side of the water that are bigger in stature. But do we get as much of a hearing? Can we bend the ear of the US administration as much under this current administration than perhaps we may have done in previous years?
It's certainly more of a challenge because of the style that Donald Trump deploys in both politics and business. The business as usual of US presidents having a very worldly view, acting as sort of the main security provider for the rest of the world, is certainly no longer as stable as it was. So we need to engage more fully. But look, Donald Trump won't be president forever. He may not have the control of the Congress and the Senate forever. That may change in November. So the dialogue that the Taoiseach and other ministers that will be in North America will have with members of Congress and members of the Senate is useful and certainly helpful. And it's a time like this when there's real uncertainty that effort becomes greater and it becomes much more important. There's no doubt that the tariffs that have come about since President Trump came back into office and does challenge our economy. We trade so much with the United States, and any increase in tariffs for access to that market challenges our domestic economy, which is why then, in addition to that, the burden will be on others that travel to other locations around the world to try to open up trade negotiations and trade links and build, I suppose, a better level of relationship with other countries to try to, in some way, help to address the problems that have been caused by the imposition of tariffs.
How do you think such a visit would be viewed by our fellow EU members? Is there potential that they could view it as a lack of solidarity? That, just touching back on the previous point I was making, that they, we can say, well, we gain a more favourable reception in the US than other countries, but will they look at it and go, look, under this administration it's futile, you're wasting your time, and by going over and being seen in photo ops in the Oval Office and so on, is there potential some of them may view it as a lack of solidarity?
No, absolutely not, because the Taoiseach, who will be assuming the role of President of the European Council in the latter half of the year, will be very conscious that, and I said this at the outset, that in addition to being just the Taoiseach of Ireland, the Prime Minister of Ireland, representing the Irish people, he will also have that added responsibility of speaking on behalf of the other 26 member states in his dialogue with President Trump. Don't forget, President Trump last week, or towards the end of the week before, was in Davos and met with many European leaders in that context. So, no, there's an alignment from a European perspective, and Ireland was very clear when President Trump indicated a desire to gain control or ownership of Greenland. We made it very clear that from our perspective was not acceptable. It's not how you do either business or diplomacy. And there was very significant pushback. And I think it was when President Trump came to Davos, when he met with the General Secretary of NATO, who was a former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, who has a very close working relationship with Taoiseach Martin from their time as being Prime Ministers together in a close group. And we saw President Trump leave Davos effectively saying that he was not going to use force to take Greenland, and he was working towards and working with the cooperation of other European states. So I think. But
can we take him on his word on that? Because we know he could change his mind on a whim.
He does, and I don't think any observer would suggest that you necessarily put much stock on what President Trump might say on occasion. I said this before, he has a particular style of negotiation. I certainly think he knows what he wants to do, and has been quite successful in achieving some of the goals that he has set. But he does it differently to what other world leaders might have done. Sometimes he starts up very high and then negotiates and does a deal at a lower level, and that's his style. And it's not. I'm not at all being critical of his approach. That's what he's elected to do from his perspective. But I think Ireland has to be strong. I think Europe has to be united. I don't think we should overreact when he says certain things, and I think we should then engage fully.
I take the point that we shouldn't overreact when he says certain things, but should we react when he does certain things? You've mentioned Greenland. There was also the actions in Venezuela in, you can say, spiriting away or arresting, some would say kidnapping Nicolas Maduro and bringing him to a court in New York. Does that raise ethical or diplomatic concerns for us? And can we genuinely, can Ireland genuinely engage with leaders it fundamentally disagrees with without appearing to endorse their actions? Or, as I said earlier on, is that difficult to pull off when you're in photo ops standing in the Oval Office?
I think what the Taoiseach in the first instance, and I said that we have to look at Ireland's economic interest too, and it's about ensuring that the people who are employed in Ireland by American companies, that we don't do anything that damages or impacts negatively on their future potential. And that's the responsibility of the Taoiseach in the first instance, to ensure that we protect Irish citizens and we protect the economy in Ireland. There are diplomatic channels that sometimes you have to talk to your friend or friends and share with them your difference of opinion or your disagreement. You do that in a cordial way when you work on the basis that they're friendly nations and have had a strong both diplomatic and economic linkage going way back. And that's what we have done consistently with the United States on matters, particularly military, that we didn't agree with, and we would have had views in relation to some of the activities in the Middle East in the past and further afield in Iraq and places like that.
But is it just going to fall on deaf ears this time?
It may have fallen on deaf ears, and it may have fallen on deaf ears in the past, but I think you have a responsibility to share your view in a respectful way, but also be cognizant and conscious that the President of the United States is elected by the citizens of the United States, and he follows as per his mandate, and it's for the citizens there to decide through elections what the outcome of that is. In a friendly way, in a direct way, we can be upfront about our views, but do so, as I said, in a diplomatic and a respectful way that recognises that important bond and link that exists between the two countries.
How much should the views of the Irish public factor into where our political leaders do or do not visit? A recent poll showing that a clear majority of the public believes the Taoiseach shouldn't visit the White House for St. Patrick's Day. The poll found almost half of the public, 47%, believe Micheál Martin shouldn't travel there. It also found 35% believe he should attend, 18% said they don't know. Is public sentiment factored into these visits, where the representatives travel to? Does that factor into Micheál Martin's thinking at all?
Well, I think the way this works, when you have an election, people are elected to do a job, and you get on with it, and you use your judgment as best you can in relation to issues that arise. In my view, in the discharge of your public duties, you can't be all the time looking over your shoulder saying, what do the public think today? Because that might change tomorrow based on something that happens or the way it's reported or the way it's presented.
I take that point, but I think if you took a poll at any time over the past year since the start of Trump administration 2.0, I'm sure most polls would find that the public wouldn't want Micheál Martin or whoever's Taoiseach to visit the White House at any time.
Yeah, but if you present that somewhat differently, and you say, do you believe that the impact of the Taoiseach snubbing an invitation to the White House will impact significantly on US investment in Ireland, could potentially impact on the lives and livelihoods of the hundreds of thousands of people here who work for American companies? Could it end up that certain products that we sell in could end up at a higher tariff because we have decided to snub the President of the United States?
And I'm sure there are many people, Timmy, who would take all that on board, but I suppose it touches back on arguments around the Occupied Territories Bill. At what point, Ireland has to watch its economy, but also be cognizant of what's morally right?
Yeah, and I think we managed that very well. And I think that the case in point in relation to the Occupied Territories Bill and the desire of the government to ensure that goods are not imported from areas that have been occupied illegally by Israeli settlers. And that's something that we have stood up against some of the American companies who challenged us on it, but understand where we're coming from. And I think that's a proportionate response because it's a relatively low amount of goods coming from there anyway, but it's the right thing to do. But I think we have to be careful in anything that the government does that it doesn't injure the economy or just to be able to make a statement. We stood up to President Trump about something that's not within our ambit to control the outcome of. And I think we've always been able to, from an American presidents in the past, there are issues in the past that arose that we didn't particularly like, and the Taoiseach of the day, as well as having that cordial relationship, would also put on the record their concerns about issues. I'm sure the Taoiseach will do that on this occasion. He did previously, as did other Taoiseach in the past. In as I said, from that friendly perspective, outline their concerns on matters of a global nature, but recognising that you have to get on with the business too, that protects our citizens.
Timmy, I think any world leader who's getting ready to go to the White House would do so with a great sense of understandable trepidation as to what might unfold. We've seen leaders such as the President of South Africa, famously or infamously, Volodymyr Zelensky last year, being utterly humiliated in the Oval Office. Now, that was obviously very much in Micheál Martin's mind last year when he went. It obviously, his visit, by comparison, passed off without incident, but there was still elements of it I'm sure he wasn't happy with. The fact that he was there on the 12th of March for a start, ahead of St. Patrick's Day itself, but there was one Irishman in the White House last St. Patrick's Day, Conor McGregor. And at the time, White House Press Secretary Caroline Levitt said she couldn't think of a better guest to have with us on St. Patrick's Day. I could think of one, the leader of Ireland, but he wasn't there. He was there nearly a week beforehand. Was there not a certain element of humiliation attached to that? And is Micheál Martin not concerned that something like that might happen again this year?
Look, it's a challenge when you're dealing with a president that has a very different approach to doing business. Hasn't followed the normal channels of diplomacy that would have been there in the past. But that's his prerogative. He's the elected president. Ireland are fortunate to get an invitation in the first instance and have that opportunity to meet with the president, set out our objectives, and have that ongoing engagement with such a superpower country that provides so much financial strength to our economy and to the European economy through foreign investment. But there's also a relationship which is useful for us on that stage to remind the president of, and to remind the Congress and the Senate of, the amount of Irish companies that employ very significant amounts of US citizens right across the United States. So it's a two-way discussion. But around those other peripheral issues that you talked about last year, That's the Americans' prerogative. They issue the invites. It's up to the Taoiseach then to make the best of whatever is offered.
He must have been fuming about it, though. I'm sure he can't have been happy.
But you don't get to be fuming about things like that. You accept what's on offer and you get on with it. We're a very small country that has a phenomenal reach within the United States. To get an invitation as head of state from an Irish perspective to the White House to celebrate the St. Patrick's Day festivities and to get the kind of national coverage in the United States, so opening up tourism opportunities, business opportunities, you take that opportunity.
Okay.
You'll never get it the way you necessarily... we don't get to write the script for this. We follow the invitation. And that's the right thing to do.
I just want to ask you before we finish, Timmy, about the Board of Peace, because Simon Harris last week said there wasn't any scenario in which Ireland would join the Donald Trump's controversial Board of Peace. Reportedly led to disagreement within government over Ireland's stance towards Trump and the Board of Peace, because the Taoiseach had previously left open the door slightly ajar that Ireland may join the Board of Peace, had expressed some reservations about it. Has there been disagreement and to what degree of seriousness between Simon Harris and Micheál Martin over the board, whether Ireland should join the Board of Peace? And do you think we should?
Well, I don't. First of all, I don't think there's any disagreement between the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach on that. It's just maybe one emphasised a point more than the other. The notion of a Board of Peace is a good idea. The notion of countries getting together in a collective way to try to address what has happened, particularly in the Gaza Strip, which was where this idea initially came from.
But don't we already have a Board of Peace? It's been around for it's been around for 80 years. It's called the United Nations.
It is, and the United Nations is a wonderful organisation that has so many different aspects and facets of it. A Board of Peace was one that certainly I understood in the early stages would have a very specific mandate to address the issues in Gaza and Palestine and Israel generally, and would seek to focus on it. I think that was where originally we thought it was going and had hopes for it, but wanted to see the terms and conditions. Then the next iteration seemed to suggest that it was going to be all-encompassing. It was effectively almost a UN 2.0 with all the bells and whistles, and then it includes, or would include, some of what I believe are the aggressors and the cause of the war in various different locations.
Indeed, you've got authoritarian countries or liberal democracies like Saudi Arabia and Belarus who are members. You have long-time US allies and NATO members like Canada, France, Italy. You have the likes of Sweden, the UK. They're not members, and you have to pay at least $1 billion to Trump to join it. From a moral and financial point of view, is Ireland better off staying clear of it?
Yeah, look, I think you're always open to, you always remain open to ideas, particularly where the end goal, if that's what it is about peace. But you don't jump headlong into it either. And you have to see who's involved and how it's going to be effective. And I'm not so sure that a Board of Peace with Vladimir Putin, Benjamin Netanyahu and others will really change the face of global conflict at the moment.
I'd be interested to see a poll of the Irish public on whether we should join a Board of Peace or not. Timmy, I do have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us on this morning. That's Minister of State, Tulla-based Minister of State, Timmy Dooley, with us.